Welcome to the YoggNation, the Spirit of Gratitude podcast on the Wintegration platform. Hello, friends. My name is Yogesh Patel, and this podcast focuses on bullying, self-awareness, and our inner spirit, inviting high-profile guests to share their experiences on these topics. My next guest is Mr. Brian Dawson, a technologist and software visionary based out of San Diego. And many of the luxuries we take for granted today in terms of how software and applications get developed again were created by the brains such as Brian. And a fun fact about him, as the computer revolution was taking shape in the early 1980s, he and his family lived just a few doors down away from where Steve Jobs grew up. Interesting to know. This was back in Palo Alto, California. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Yogi. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This has been a long time coming. So I'm really ready to get into some of these topics. And by the way, I've called myself a technologist, but man, software visionary. Thank you for that. I'm going to save the clip and send it out to promote myself.
Okay. So curious, did you ever knock on Steve Jobs' door and say, "Steve, can Steve come out and play?"
No. What's funny is at the time I didn't even know that they lived there. I was living in an unincorporated area of Los Altos, or an incorporated area that sits between Mountain View, Los Altos, and Sunnyvale, by Steve Wozniak's high school homestead. Um, but at that time, I had no idea. I ended up looking later. I ended up looking at the maps and the timeline, and I'm like, wait, no joke. This guy was, this was 1, 2, 3 streets behind me, directly behind my backyard, where, the roots of this Mac that I'm joining you on today was being developed. I, I, I will share, if you don't mind, because it is interesting. We hadn't talked about this. I will share an interesting story about when I did live there that aligns with the topic.
Yes, please. I'm curious. Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah, so I didn't know Apple was there. I didn't know that they were in Steve Jobs' parents' garage building what is now, one of the largest companies in the world. But what I did know is that there were a group of Hell's Angels in the neighborhood that didn't want us there. So it's funny, it had kind of gone out of my mind. But when we talk about kind of gratitude, uh, along with bullying, right, it's interesting because I have real gratitude for being able to um, grow and develop in kind of this rich ecosystem of the Apple garage, living behind Adobe Creek, right? Down the street from the HP garage when I was in Palo Alto, or a mile away. Um, but then with all of that, there was always this layer of bullying, oftentimes in line with my race. So in this particular case, I remember a day when my brother and I were hanging out at the park. Some what they call junior Hells Angels, who rode motorcycles, dirt bikes, then came up to the elementary school or park and asked us where we lived. We said there. They told us they don't want to see us. If they see us again, they're going to whoop our butts.
Why do you think they said that?
Because we were black and they were taught to hate, right? They were raised to hate. This was when we get into bullying, I think when you see a lot of it, and there's some great examples going on today. Um, bullies don't tend to operate in isolation, and bullying doesn't exist in isolation. I'd say oftentimes as a social species, you're going to find that bullying isn't an individual act. It's connected to a social grouping. It's connected to an affinity. It's right. And I really think that that's what it's about. But yeah, what triggered me is we had moved back to Palo Alto, but I was still going to school in Los Altos. So I would take the bus down from school down the hill, and then I'd get dropped off at our old house, and I'd wait to be picked up by my parents. And on this day, I had driven the bus down, got in front of our old house. I'm just hanging out, and all of a sudden, I see this motorcycle coming down the street, and uh, and I start to run, and this guy chases me on this bike down the street, and I had instantly enough. I don't know where the family was from. I want to say maybe Yugoslavia at that time. Um, and and I booked it 2 blocks down the street. This 8-year-old kid, as fast as I could, and dove over the fence to the neighbors and banged on the door and had them let me in, um, because I was so concerned. So anyway, I know that's a tangent, Yogi. I know you'll edit, but you just brought up a contrast, right? I'm celebrating living where Apple was invented, but at the same time that happened, um, I was being told to get out of the neighborhood because of my color.
How did you overcome that?
I can't say I did. I mean, I think I got to process that for a minute. I think we're gonna actually. There was another incident that we talked about in sort of the prep for this call that happened around this time that I think was a linchpin, and maybe we'll talk about that. But um, I think the shortest answer for how I overcame it, I do think that, so I think some of the things we'll talk about today still form a profound basis for who I am and how I view and interact with the world today, both for good and bad. But I would probably say, how did I overcome that and similar, often race related incidents? Is my wife, my friends that I've been friends with since I was 13 years old, my wife that I've been with I'm 13 years old. It's really building some confidence in self and a feeling of safety through connection with my friends and family.
You mentioned family, friends, and connections. And one of the things in our planning call that you had also alluded to was protecting your identity and spirit. Tell me about that.
That's an interesting one, and I'll give some setup. When you talk about how did some of these incidents we'll cover influence me, well, they gave me a real feeling or firsthand experience and depth of care and concern for what it feels like to be the other,
Mm.
to look to cross boundaries and explore other spaces, when in that you're going to inherently have something that separates you from the majority group that is in that space. That actually led to forming a diversity focused lacrosse organization. We found lacrosse, we fell in love with it. My son went on to play lacrosse in college eventually. But I found, as I began to get ingratiated to or familiar with lacrosse, I'd go to a tournament with 6,500 people, and I could count the people that looked like me on one, or if I'm lucky, maybe two hands. And I knew my son, me having grown up in Palo Alto as another, I knew my son in this case was going to love this sport and enjoy it, was going to grow as another. Right. So with that, Nation United, a diversity focused lacrosse organization, national lacrosse organization, and nonprofit that we built, um, started to adopt this concept of crew and cause and identity and spirit. Crew and cause is pretty clear. You get a group of people together, in this case, a group of boys, a group of athletes as a crew with different backgrounds, and you focus them on a shared cause that they're excited about, and they can move mountains. But the other is identity and spirit. And this captured a lot of what I've learned and experienced, and that's that, really truly being diverse, really truly being accepting, really truly being able to move into any space requires that you can do that while maintaining both identity and spirit. Right? Identity is comfort, confidence, and love for who you are, where you come from, where you originate from, what your ethnic, racial, familial identity is, cultural identity, and then spirit is the ability to embrace life positively, embrace life, positively. So what we find is that, oftentimes people that are perceived as different, neurodivergent, brown or black in a white majority area, what have you, um, that you're forced to make a choice of, do I protect my spirit and therefore assimilate and change who I am, rough off my edges, change how I interact so I'll be accepted in the group and my spirit is protected. I'm liked, I get to go to the parties, right? But oftentimes that happens at the cost of your identity. So ideally, you want to be able to say, I can go participate in the larger world. I can participate as me. I can participate proud of my family, my customs, my differences, and I can protect my spirit.
And I'm just trying to understand, what's the message that could apply today in terms of what you've experienced, what you've learned, and what would you say to, say, a teenager, a young adolescent, and given all of this adversity that you had gone through, and I think part of that again has shaped and developed the character that you are today, the resiliency, the perseverance, and just having that good energy about yourself. I mean, I kind of don't want to say that in that manner, but what's the learning lesson that a young person listening to this podcast can take away, or even as an adult?
I think it's empathy. I think it's constantly seek to expand your perspective. Um, when people tell you something is going on, when people tell you they're hurting or they've had incidents, um, do your best to understand that your reality may not be theirs. So try to engage and listen to it with an open mind. And I think on the inverse of that, um, um, as you start to accept and listen to other people's challenges and perspectives, I think it innately uh, will make us more empathetic actors, right? I think it's important to understand that finding common connection and care for each other as neighbors, whether it's on a block level, a city level, a country level, or global level, is important. It's vital. Um, uh, to us being able to get the best out of life. And then it goes back down specifically to kids. You asked earlier, what did I learn from this? Right. And or how did I overcome it or deal with it? I said it was friends and family. It's know that there will always be people that best case don't understand you. Worst case, they attack you. I'd hate to use the old adage. Know that they are attacking you because of a deficit, shortcoming, or experience on their side. It is not you. And um, uh, reach out.
So do you confront or walk away when you have people that approach you in that manner?
I'd like to say if you're clever enough and you have it and you have the confidence, for one of a better word, but this is really varied. You know, um, confront it by we'll say when they go low, you go high. There are uh, clever ways to safely call out the faults in the way that people are engaging with you. But I'd also say it's not your job as an individual to directly fight every battle for fairness and kindness, right? You may not be armed to do so. Um, and if you're not, and it may not be safe to do so, walk away, but walk away knowing that that incident is not you. Each and every one of us have faults, and each and every one of us have special powers inside. And they may not see it. Shoot, you may not even see it right now. Um, some of us are 50 years old and still trying to find it, but you are special. You're not perfect. You are special, and this is again where we talk about um, find friends that appreciate what is special about you. That's who you need to interact with. Lean on your family, share with them. Will they all lend a forgiving ear and empathetic ear? No, maybe not. Some people, again, aren't equipped with the tools. But what you can do is you can be empathetic to others, you can listen to others, and you can find, connect, and be vulnerable with um, others that you believe you can entrust with that.
So what do you mean by vulnerable?
What I mean vulnerable is honest, frank, moving away the mask, being comfortable talking about how I feel, being comfortable saying I was scared, being comfortable saying I was annoyed, being comfortable saying I was angry. I mean, there's different levels, right? But it's go on YoggNation and talk about something personal and maybe even painful, right? Um, when you're vulnerable, those when you're vulnerable, people can better understand you. But then I think more importantly, when you show your fallibility, your fears, your faults through vulnerability, others learn empathy and compassion. They learn to go, "Wow, I'm not alone. I feel the same way. Yeah, I was jumped after a computer class and never wanted to do it again." So sometimes you give through vulnerability, and you can have a cascading impact on other people.
Very profound. I mean, I hard for me to come up with a statement from what you just shared. I think a lot of it, what you just described, is that connective tissue that we all have. I think that in spite of the adversity that you had faced as a child, you and others across the U.S. at the time, it's it's that empathy, it's that kindness that, to a certain level, we all share. And for those that don't have it, I'm sorry, you just move on with your life.
Yeah, we just got to try to move on. I think we make our attempts again to be honest, open, frank, and vulnerable and try to bridge that divide where we can, right? Because on a macro level, we're in a particular place in the country, and this is to not talk politically, but where there's a divide. Can we, wherever you sit, lend an empathetic ear, listen, extend yourself, try? And if you can't, yes, there's a reality that we all have our own lives to live. So
Was there an ever a point where you bullied a person or you stood up for a bullied friend? I'm more curious to find out how you stood up to a bullied friend, if you can share that as the last remaining question today.
yeah, I know absolutely. But the interesting thing is, I know absolutely I have. It's a specific incident is not imprinted on my mind, or it actually an incident I would call out would necessarily be great. Uh, 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 and it is, the one that is coming to mind is a physical incident. Is a physical incident where a huge guy, Rob Perez, rest in peace, jumped a friend of mine, and I was, about a third of the size of this guy, and I had to jump in between them to protect him. I'm not going to call it an act of valor, but I'd say, and maybe it came from my experience. I always, and really my family, and it hasn't had the greatest results. I've always had a sense of justice. So even though sometimes, as we've talked about, I've done things that I'm embarrassed of, right? And I've sort of been the taunter, the bullier, or done wrong. By and large, I've spent more time of my life, um, uh, just trying to ensure justice. Don't bully people. Don't right. So I can't think of a specific incident.
Fantastic. Brian, thank you for joining, and look forward to perhaps sharing some more stories as I invite you back in the future.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Yogi. I look forward to coming back again. I could talk about this subject for hours, and I think it's important.
I, that I know. Maybe over a beer when we see each other next. Thanks again, Brian. Take care.